Guten Abend. Guten Abend.
Good evening. A warm welcome here to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I'm very glad that you have appeared in such great numbers in order to welcome our very special guests tonight and what everyday life during the war in Gaza looks like. So once again, a warm welcome to you. My name is Imme Scholz, and I'm on the board of the foundation. And I'm very glad that we have panelists here who are able to tell us about the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. And I'm very grateful for the great interest you are demonstrating by your presence here. I would like to make you aware of the simultaneous translation. And if you master both languages, you will not need simultaneous translation. But otherwise, do get a headset, and then you can follow a translation of your choice. For more than a year now, war has been raging in the Gaza Strip. Large parts of the area in Khan Yunis and elsewhere are totally destroyed. More than 45,000 Palestinians, about 70% of them women and children, have been killed by the military operations of the Israeli armed forces. Almost the entire population is displaced within the Gaza Strip and lives mostly in catastrophic humanitarian conditions, especially now that the temperatures are low and it rains a lot. Food is scarce and expensive. Medical care is terrible, and the situation of daily care and provision is extremely precarious. For many people in the Gaza Strip, every day is a struggle for survival. The reality of this humanitarian catastrophe is documented in numerous reports by international and local organizations. Nevertheless, its extent is difficult to grasp. This is also due to the fact that we in Germany and Europe usually only see fragments of the everyday reality of war in Gaza. Israel continues to deny foreign journalists access to the Gaza Strip, and Palestinians can only leave the Gaza Strip in rare cases. This is precisely why it is so important not to lose out of sight the people on the ground, their fates, needs, and desires. To do that, we have to look and listen. We must not become numb and indifferent. We should maintain our empathy for all people in the region, be they Palestinians, Israelis, or Lebanese. This is not only an imperative of humanity, but it's also the quintessence of human and international law. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security. This applies to Israel and the Israelis, who were attacked in a horrific manner by Hamas on 7th October 2023. It also applies to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. The warring parties are responsible for protecting this universal claim, but so is the international community as a whole, including us in Germany. A political solution is urgently needed for the war in the Gaza Strip and the larger conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, one that guarantees security for Israel and takes into account the Palestinians' right to self-determination. However, we will only talk about the situation there. And today we want to focus on the people in the Gaza Strip and the humanitarian situation on the ground. We want to gain a better understanding of what everyday life is currently like for women, men, and especially children in the Gaza Strip. And we want to hear about the work that international and local NGOs are doing in Gaza and what they are still able to do. I'm very pleased that our former doctoral fellow, Abed Shukri, who was able to leave the Gaza Strip with his family a few months ago, is on the panel for this. I'm also delighted about the participation of Dörte Siegmund, who until recently managed our office in Ramallah with great care and sensitivity. My great respect and thanks are due to her team in Ramallah and our Palestinian partner organization in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and especially in Gaza. I'm also very much looking forward to the reports of Arwa Damon, who has been to Gaza several times with her aid organization, Inara, most recently in November 2024, and Mahmoud Muna, whose book about Gaza, Daybreak in Gaza, was published in autumn 2024. Thank you both for making the long journey to Berlin. I now hope we have a stimulating and intensive discussion, and I will hand over to my colleague Bauke Baumann, who's moderating this evening. Thank you.
Ja, herzlich willkommen auch von mir, Bauke
A
Baumann.
warm welcome also from my side. My name is Bauke Baumann, and I work with Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I will be facilitating this event. I would like to welcome you very warmly, and I would also like to welcome the community watching over the stream, the live stream. And well, as it was published, a breakthrough in negotiations for a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been achieved, apparently. And this, of course, is an excellent piece of news. And this is not just nice for us, but for people in Gaza. Whether it will actually change anything about the situation on the ground, well, this is still open to question. It remains to be seen. Well, we want to zoom into the everyday situation of people in Gaza, their everyday life that since the 7th of October 2023 has been characterized and determined by the war between Israel and Hamas, and a life of flight and death. And we want to listen very closely, although sometimes it is really hard to bear. We also want to understand the role of aid organizations, relief organizations such as AWA, and of course the catastrophic situation of people on the ground. How can it be improved, and how can the right to life and security be enforced? And apparently there is a breakthrough in negotiations, but nonetheless the political situation will certainly not be our main topic today, and we will be mentioning it time and again. But nonetheless, it is the people in Gaza on the ground. This is what we want to zoom into. How can we improve their situation and their daily lives? We are very glad to have a Palestinian from Gaza here at the panel, and we have other experts on the panel who either went to Gaza recently or who cooperate with organizations in Gaza. A warm welcome to our panelists. Great to have you here. And I would like to briefly introduce our panelists, and after that we'll have a panel discussion. And after the discussion, the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. Let me start off with Dr. Abed Shukri. Abed is from Gaza. After his A-levels, I think it was in 1992, he came to Germany. He studied here. He earned his doctorate here in Germany, and he was also a scholarship holder of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. In 2007, he went back to Gaza as a professor, and since 2016, he has been a professor for quality management and labor sciences at Gaza University, and now he was able to leave the Gaza Strip in the direction of Egypt, and since then he has come back to Germany. Thank you for being here, Abed.
Als nächstes möchte ich Dorte
Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Dorte Sigmund. Dorte was until the end of December in Ramallah, and she managed the office, and she worked on Jerusalem and Gaza and the West Bank, and she worked and researched into local peace initiatives on the ground, especially Palestinian non-governmental organizations, and she's also an associated scientist at the Bundeswehr University in Munich, the University of the Armed Forces in Germany. Welcome, Dorte. The two next panelists, I will introduce them in English, so I'll change over to English so that they don't need translation.
Native of East Jerusalem, where he was born and raised. He's the owner of the famous educational bookshop in East Jerusalem and is active in many cultural and literature initiatives. He's also a regular contributor to media outlets on culture and politics. Mahmoud curated an impressive selection of emerging writers from around the Arab world. He is one of the editors of the book Daybreak in Gaza, Stories of Palestinian Lives and Culture, that was published in autumn last year. I think later on he will read us also some small passages from the book. Welcome, Mahmoud. And finally, I'd like to introduce you, Ava Damon. Ava is the president and founder of the humanitarian NGO Inara that supports children in war zones. She's a former CNN senior international correspondent, and she has over a decade of experience in war zones across the MENA region, for example, in Syria and Iraq. Often she focused her work on humanitarian stories, and also the concept behind her NGO Inara stems from her first-hand experience on the ground. She lives in Istanbul, if I'm not mistaken, and also speaks fluently Turkish and Arabic. That's wow. Honored to have you here today after we had you already yesterday. So please, thank you for being with us. And I would also like to start the discussion with you, Ava, as you have been to Gaza several times since October 7, 2003 with your NGO Inara, lastly, if I'm not mistaken, in November last year, right? And you brought us also some impressions from there on video. So either you say a few words or we start with the video and then...
I think we should start with the video.
Then without further ado, we would show a video of 1.5 minutes and then we continue with you, Ava.
It feels never-ending, the expanse of destruction and devastation. He was in the Mawasi Khan Yunis explosion on the one that happened on the 10th. If she does survive, she's gonna wake up to realize that she's an orphan. So little aid is getting in. Some of the lowest amounts that we've seen since this all began. And more people are being crushed into the so-called safe zone that isn't really safe at all and cannot be considered a safe zone or a humanitarian zone because people are subjected to utterly inhumane living conditions. We can't even get in bars of soap.
امتى اخر مره حصلته كنت عم تقولي لي؟
تقريبا من 5 شهور ويمكن اكثر.
وشو عم تعملوا لكن؟ للتنظيف، للتغسيل؟
واخر مره جابوا من هنا راحوا على البحر وجابوا رمل بحر وجالوا عندنا اخر مره.
بالرمل؟
بالرمل رمل وليمون وحبه ملح ونجلة.
Look, people are living in these buildings.
A coffee shop here in the front of the Arabic.
صور أفلام أكشن.
I try to hold on to the apps, but do you see it? Do you see the way that some children just don't seem to engage at all, while others, I mean, this one little girl, her laughter was just, it was like hearing magic. These small, brief, fleeting moments that disappear almost as quickly as they are created. Just take a look at these kids that I just met in Nasser Hospital. There are significantly higher numbers of children, and this is just in Nasser, that have impetigo, that have meningitis, that have hepatitis A. This is so preventable. It feels as if we have normalized what's happening in Gaza. We've normalized Gaza's suffering. Babies are freezing to death. Children are being pushed up red lines. It just gets worse and worse every single day. We were warning about the cold, but we were not able to bring in enough winterization items. We were warning about the floods, but we weren't even able to bring in enough things like sandbags so that tents could be fortified. We've been warning about the hunger. It breaks. Your heart just breaks a million times over every single day.
Thank you very much for bringing those dire impressions from Gaza. Could you maybe please elaborate a bit more on your experiences in Gaza? So maybe tell us a bit more about the situation, especially of children and women. How are they in terms of nutrition, medical care, schooling?
The thing is you know, that video, it's not even 2% of what you see and what people are actually going through. And you also realize when you're there, it's like, you know, the camera, it's filming what's kind of in front of it, but what you're seeing, it's not just in front of you, it's all around you. And you're looking through this 180 vision, and that also, it doesn't capture the sort of the constant fear that people have to live with the drone that's always buzzing overhead, or the hunger. When we talk about hunger, the hunger is very real. Like right now in Gaza, if you're lucky, you're on 1 meal a day. If you're lucky, you're feeding your children 1 meal a day. When we talk about, you know, access to medical care, I mean, just take every single aspect of life that we all take for granted. It's gone. And so I'll share a story actually of a little girl who my charity, working along with others, is trying to evacuate from Gaza, because in some ways she kind of like encapsulates so many aspects of what it means to be or try to survive in Gaza right now. So she came across to us a few days ago. She's in Gaza City in a hospital there, and she has a condition that doctors believe is a protein C deficiency. Now, this is highly treatable, and it basically means that her blood is, I'm not a doctor, so I might botch this, but basically her blood is coagulating too much. So right now, her legs are all like puffy and purple, and one of them has already gone septic, which means that it's highly likely going to need to be amputated. So this little girl, basically, because of the lack of medical infrastructure, because of the lack of our ability to bring in medications quickly and efficiently, and because of the lack of capacity for testing, the testing that she actually needs no longer exists in Gaza City. That capacity is gone. In the north of Gaza, you have 1 CT scanner in 1 facility right now. And she's deteriorating very, very, very quickly. And we've been jumping through hoops to try to get this medical evacuation to happen. And normally that takes roughly, 5 to 6 weeks. And medical evacuations right now are like at barely a trickle. And you have to submit a name of a guardian for a child to be able to be evacuated from Gaza. So we initially submit her mother's name. She's rejected. We submit her grandmother's name. She's rejected. We submit her aunt's name. She's rejected. And we finally end up finding a 4th name of a distant cousin to be able to go with her. And so you just need to sit and imagine like the trauma that this child is going to be experiencing being so separated from her mother. Now, thankfully, somehow, we all think this is some sort of a miracle. We have no idea what pressure point actually worked. Her mother has secured the permission to be able to travel with her. But that just shows you how difficult it is for even the most basic things to happen. You asked about education in particular. Education, if it exists, is due to the extraordinary efforts. I mean, I also have to pause here for a second and say, Gazans' capacity to help themselves and each other with such dignity is nothing I have ever seen anywhere else. like as aid organizations, in many ways, especially with what my charity does, we don't have to reinvent the wheel because the capacity is already there. So on the education front, you know, anyone who's a teacher, anyone who has experience is setting up what we're calling these makeshift education tents and camps, which is basically just underneath a tarp. But Save the Children recently wanted to bring in educational items, and all their trucks were denied because that's not considered life-saving. And so every single step of the way is just hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. And I mean, I could go on for a very, very, you know, long time. I lost my words to describe Gaza probably around a year ago.
Thank you for sharing this, which is really wow. And thank you for the precious work you and your organization are doing there. This is really also important. I would now like to turn to Abid Chokri and we'll switch to German, as he prefers to talk in German. Lieber Abid.
Dear Abid, before we talk about the situation in Gaza, I would like to ask you if you feel safe now here with your family in Germany. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and the Department of the Middle East, and what I was really looking forward to being here tonight. The question can be answered with a two-pronged approach, because my oldest daughter, because she's older than 18, she wasn't able to migrate to Germany together with us, with the rest of the family. And nor the hardship case, nor the situation that is a war situation here in Germany helped her to get a visa to enter Germany. Now, she's on her own in Egypt, but she keeps on studying online, so she continues her medical studies, and then everything is going well, then she might be able to finish her bachelor by the end of the month. But then as from March, we don't really know how she will be able to proceed with her studies, because the masters, of course, are linked to the participation in an hospital, and I don't know how we are going to be able to manage that. And the rest of our children have the possibility to attend international school in the city of Bonn since November, where I am placed as a research fellow, and so I'm moving forth and back from Bonn to Berlin and back, and now I will have to share some information that the Deutsche Bahn, the German railways, between 2007 and now really has gone through some negative developments. Hardly there is any train arriving on time, and I do remember that we did have those times where the railway was a lot more reliable. But of course, this is not an issue when we talk about Gaza, but just as a small comparison. So we are doing quite well. We feel safe. We are in a safe space. We have a roof over our heads, so nothing to complain about. So that's good to hear. I wish your eldest daughter all the best in Egypt. You have lived through more than 6 months of war in the Gaza Strip before you were able to emigrate to Egypt in April, and you're still in ongoing contact with your friends and families from Gaza. What does it mean to be on the flight and to be torn away from your everyday life, from university and school? Can you share a few words on what you have experienced these more than 6 months between October 2023 and April 2024? This is very hard to describe with mere words. It is very difficult to grapple with that. So independently of what I tell you about it or write about it, I do fail because it is just simply not explainable. Arwa told us that if you're lucky, you will have one meal a day. And even in November 2023, where or maybe we'll have to take one step back. On the 13th of October, we did 5 flyers in Gaza cities that were dropped from the Israeli Air Force, so that it would be safer for us to move down south. This would be the sake of our safety, but what do I do with my family, with my wife and kids? Should we move south? Should we stay here? I did have the parents of my wife, the mother is disabled, and the father had surgery on his heart. So where should we go whenever something happens? So we took the decision to rather go south because of the children and my political family. So this is something that we do in October 13th, 2023. And we stayed some time in Ramallah, and then because of the bombing, we did have to leave Ramallah, and then we had 3 disabled people, older people. So this was the grandmother of my wife that has a paralysis since 2014, and a sister of my wife, she is bound to the wheelchair, and her mother and her father, as I told you. And this considering the bombings, the shelling. So these people had to flee. More than 50 people were there, and we did have to flee. So wherever you go in the Gaza Strip, and we're talking about the south in November, December, where the south of Gaza was supposed to be a safe space, but you wouldn't be safe anywhere in the Gaza Strip, and even less so in the south. So in November 2023, we were in Khan Yunis, and this is where the suffering started. So sometimes we did have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, waiting in line to get some bread. And if we were lucky, we could get 2 kilograms of bread for more than 50 people. So that means there are just some crumbs left for each and everyone. And this is where we're talking about the south, where the situation was supposed to be quite humane. So we did have some food left, but it became worse and worse. And this is where really we did not have a lot to eat. And all of a sudden, we had attacks, did have to go back to Ramallah, and to go forth and back at Ramallah and Khan Yunis, we did have to do that 5 to 6 times, and each time we weren't able to take everything. We had to be accommodated in tents, and drinking water wasn't available anymore. We didn't have any tap water. I'm sorry, I'm talking about tap water and less so drinking water. I was talking about the prices that were just shooting up, so we didn't have the possibility to buy some water. So the income, of course, was reduced, and it is very complicated to tell you. In Gaza, for our everyday, we pay with the Israeli shekel, and usually we receive new bills in summer, which is the celebration, the sacrifice. And in 2013, no new bills were issued, and so the bills that we receive are not of any use anymore. So it is quite problematic to pay with it, and banking does not work anymore, and you cannot retrieve any money. So the whole system has basically collapsed. And it's broken down. And when we talk about schools or universities, so basically all the universities in the Gaza Strip have been destroyed, and I am still a professor. I'm still the department head for machine engineering and civil engineering. This is like a mixture between machine engineering and economy, and I'm head of the Masters of Mechatronics, and we still have online classes, and I do record the lectures, and I put them online in Gaza, North or South, whenever they have the possibility to download the videos. They can watch the content, and whenever they have their questions, they send me the questions via WhatsApp, and we try to answer those questions via WhatsApp and Zoom. This is how we try to help one another. The same applies to lessons in school, and we did have some special programs. But of course, this requires electricity, and this is not really easy to get. And we did have cases where students, in order to be able to pass an exam or a test, they did have to find a place where they had internet access. So we needed solar cells in order to have access to electricity. But then, unfortunately, those locations have been attacked, and students lost their lives only because they wanted to pass that particular exam. And afterwards, I was talking to the dean of the faculty, and I told him that it's not right that people have to sacrifice their lives in order to attend exams if we weren't able to do that somehow otherwise. And we try to mutually help one another. We try to not give up, but the challenges are huge, and with what we have to fight are not easy to overcome and to manage. I could go on forever and the whole night, but I'll leave some space for the others to step in.
We will have more rounds, but I thank you very much for this account. It is really great that despite the situation, online tuition has been organized by you and your colleague professors. That's unbelievable.
I switch back to English in order to bring in my third guest, Mahmoud Muna from East Jerusalem. So you have recently co-edited a collection of testimonies from Gaza called Daybreak in Gaza. The book is meant to humanize the people in Gaza, to tell their stories, and to stand as mark of resistance to the destruction. Can you maybe briefly tell us how this book came about?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. It's very hard to follow up from my previous speakers and colleagues. Well, it all started back in November when I was sitting in my desk in my bookshop. Very few people were coming, and mostly I was seeing journalists. Everyone at that time, everyone who stayed 2 nights in a hotel in Dubai became a Middle East expert. So all the journalists were coming to my bookshop to tell me what happened, what should happen, what will happen, and I was just nodding my head. And I was watching the news, and I had this horrible list of my friends written on my notebook. And every day I come to my office and I connect with these friends of mine just to make sure that they are safe. And often I make a phone call. It was still possible to phone and ask how things are. And as the days progressed, I figured out 2 things. One is the voice of Gaza is absent. Everyone have take the entitlement to speak about Gaza. Except the Gazans themselves. We're not hearing their voice, by design, of course, because of the lack of journalists, but also because of the lack of direct access. The second is our conversation with my friends started to shrink, and this question of how are you became an impossible question to ask. So over Christmas, I went back after the new year and tried to change my questions, and I started to ask the question, tell me more. Not the question of how are you. And really wasn't the idea of writing a book. It was just to keep relationship with my friends and to just get to know a little bit about their life. I thought they're not going to answer the question, tell me more. They probably don't want to speak. But actually I was surprised of their willingness and their generosity to speak, to describe their lives, their neighborhood, their work, their current experiences, but also their previous experiences and their hopes for the future as well. And in no time, I was being given so much hours of conversations. In that same time, I consulted with my friends, Matthew Teller, who's my co-editor in the UK, and we said, well, maybe let's start to expand. Let's try to expand on our network. Let's try to reach out for some sample of these stories of the normal people in Gaza who's experiencing this. In normal time, they will be writing their story. They will be able to tell their stories. Now they cannot. The only thing we can do as people who work in that field of literature and books, what we could do is give them that help at that point and write their stories. And by October, by February, March, April, we had hundreds, more than 150 actually, interviews done with different people. And it was still possible to interact. Gradually, by May, it was The interviews were done on WhatsApp, recorded messages. People sent us short answers in a recorded format. It was very hard to track people. Started to become really difficult. So we put a limit that by August we need to complete the project in order to get a book in a year time. I was surprised by people's generosity, but also at that time by people framing of hopefulness. They didn't want to give up to despair. They refuse this notion of helplessness. They spoke a lot about their anger and about their frustration and about how the world has turned blind eyes and deaf ears for them. But they still believed, and I think this is a key moment here, they still believed in the humanity of the other, even when the other is not treating them fairly and justly and doesn't even see them as equal human beings. So I'm saying this because when we started to tell them that we intended to write this book in English to a global audiences, they encouraged us. They said, yes, take our voices, take our stories, and let it, because they believe that if people read, if people know, if people are exposed to those realities, they will not accept what is happening to them. And I think this is an important point, even after a year and plus of dehumanizing the people in Gaza. The people in Gaza did not lose their humanity. And they are, as has been said, they are actually teaching us how to stay human and how to keep perspective on life and on justice and fairness and all these principles.
Could you read us a small...
Thank you.
Could you give us a little... and maybe tell the page so that the translators would more easily...
Page 166. This is from Mr. Khouri, who is a theologian in Gaza, who traces his back more than 1,000 years in Gaza. He was born in Gaza. We interviewed him just before he left. It's a long interview, but he ending the interview was saying, "Today, I think I'm in a phase of depression or denial after what's happening in Gaza. It is simply too much to process. I'm grieving that the Christian community, which has such a long history in Gaza, is disappearing, not as part of a natural progression, but because of ethno-religious cleansing by the occupier. We have been misrepresented as bloodthirsty, illiterate terrorists, but we are not. We are a beautiful, life-loving, caring community that will host you, feed you, and protect you. The world needs Gazans, people who refuse to give up, give in to despair, who will always find a way to prevail. You cannot erase Gaza. You can occupy Gaza. You can destroy Gaza, but you will never, ever take it away from us. It is the same as in 1948, when the colonizers tried to erase Palestine from our memory and failed. Now they are trying again. We will not give up. We will not give in. We will always rebuild Gaza in our memories and in our imagination and in our hearts, until one day we will rebuild Gaza for real."
Thank you. This is really powerful. Maybe we take more excerpts later. Thank you. Dorte, jetzt spreche ich wieder Deutsch.
And I will switch back to German now. Until recently, you were the office manager of our office in Ramallah. As the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, we mainly work with think tanks, organizations from civil society, not only in Gaza and East and with the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but also in the Gaza Strip. And, well, can you tell how the situation of Palestinian NGOs is like at the moment, especially since the 7th of October 2023? Are they able to work, and if so, how? Well, speaking overall, the Heinrich-Böll Foundation is supplying Gaza with its 4 partners in the Gaza Strip. It's 2 women's rights organizations, 1 organization in educational promotion, and 1 in environmental justice at the interface of human rights. And they continue to work under adverse conditions in a very dedicated manner with their groups from civil society. For example, the partner organization, Greatest Development and Media Center, continues to bring in young journalists, and they cooperate with young journalists in the Gaza Strip, and they try to find out how to research facts under these adverse conditions and how they can publish these facts and prepare these facts. It is very important work. Imre Scholz mentioned it initially, due to restricted access to the Gaza Strip for foreign journalists. Thus, the information that our partners are compiling in this respect are fundamental in order to give a human face to the war, to show the human face here and the activities from the part of civil society. The partner organizations work in this area, and they are cooperating closely with our office in Ramallah in order to counteract dehumanization of people in Gaza. At the same time, it is true that our partner organizations in the Gaza Strip are faced with the same adverse life conditions. So what is a typical day in the life of one of our partner organizations on the ground? They tell us that they start their day by, first of all, researching whether family members that they have been separated from, what their whereabout is. Well, and there is internal displacement, and this has increased tenfold since the 7th of October. Whether these relatives are alive, then they have to find wood and to make fire with, and it is the most adverse living conditions due to Israeli players and the reality of war, but also secondary effects, but they are not secondary in importance. That is gangs, and they are dominating, trying to dominate the streets of Gaza, so they're subjected to their violence, and there is an increase of violence against women, children of both sexes, gender-based violence, and this is what they have to manage in a way, and it is all the more surprising and admirable that they advocate human rights, and this really merits our respect and our continued support.
Ja, herzlichen Dank für deine Arbeit.
Thank you very much for your work, daughter, but also for the work of your team in Gaza and Ramallah. And these are truly adverse conditions where the communication between Gaza and Ramallah has really become more difficult. And nowadays it is probably more like signal messages or WhatsApp. Yes, signal. So they are recording signal messages in Gaza, and in Ramallah they try to make a transcript and make it available to target groups worldwide, especially Germany. And thus, these messages ultimately find their way into the documentation for political and societal decision makers in Germany and Europe.
Now, as we have talked already about the role of civil society in Gaza. I would like to dive a bit deeper and speak more about the achievements and especially the constraints of international humanitarian organizations. And Ava, maybe you can tell us a bit more, what can UN organizations like UNRWA, but also like international NGOs like yours, INARA, do in terms of humanitarian assistance in Gaza, and what are the constraints of their work? Basically, why are so little aid is coming in? That I think that's the main question, at least for me, or why is it so difficult to organize this assistance? Maybe you can give us more from your experience on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Before I address that question, though, I just would like to ask of all of you to just pause for a second and realize that you had to write a book because of the dehumanization. You have to run campaigns against dehumanization. Can we just recognize how dystopianly absurd it is that not just since October 7th, but for decades before this, a population of human beings has had to convince the rest of the world that they live, love, and laugh like the rest of them. And I say this from my sort of perspective as, you know, having been at CNN and a journalist, and seeing the dehumanization that happened post 9/11 of basically initially, you know, it spread to basically, you know, all Muslims and anyone who wasn't white. No nation can go to war if it doesn't somehow succeed in dehumanizing the population against which it is waging war. And we all have a responsibility to be hyper-vigilant to try to prevent that from happening. When it comes to humanitarian aid, I mean, I guess the simplest way to explain it is when we want to bring aid trucks into Gaza, those aid trucks first get cleared by Israel. And so there you're running into all of these hurdles of what can I bring in, what can I not bring in, right? So like Save the Children wasn't allowed to bring in notebooks and pens. You know, at one point in time, we weren't being permitted to bring in insulin, pediatric insulin. And there's never any like clear guidance on what you can or can't bring in. You know, 1 week you're allowed to put Nutella in your humanitarian food parcels, the next week you're not. Sometimes you're allowed to put sugar, the next week you're not because it can be used to make explosives. So the first hurdle is Israel actually clearing the aid, which takes an extraordinarily long time. The second big hurdle is the looting and the criminality that exists. Now, it's important to point out that the vast majority of this looting and criminality happens in what's known as a red zone, which means that this zone is completely and totally controlled by Israel, and we can only move through it through coordination with the Israeli side. Now, what does this look like kind of in a nutshell? So we will ask for permission from the Israelis to make a movement, and they will give us that preliminary permission. The day that we want to make the movement, we wait for confirmation. We move to a holding point. We sit and we wait at a holding point, and then when we get the green light, we are permitted to go pick up the aid. There is chunks of road between like these holding points and then where the aid actually is that is controlled by these criminal gangs that Israel keeps saying, you know, Hamas is looting the aid, Hamas is looting the aid. One, that's not really the case, and two, it's illogical because if Hamas was looting the aid, why is Israel allowing these looters to gather, to burn tires, to run around with their machetes, to get their barricades ready that they're using to then block the aid trucks and loot the aid? But yes, the criminality and the looting has been a huge contributing factor to why aid is not actually reaching the people who need it. And I have repeatedly described this as sort of deliberately orchestrated anarchy and chaos. And we saw the criminality and the looting shift over time. So originally, it was highly focused on the cigarette smugglers. Now, if you want to buy one cigarette in Gaza today, keeping in mind everything you've heard about, you know, how hungry everybody is, one cigarette costs you between, I think depending on the brand, like $40 to $80. That's for one cigarette. So if you're sticking 5 cartons of cigarettes inside a humanitarian truck, that's a big payday. So when this first was kind of starting up, they were mostly targeting the humanitarian trucks. They were grabbing the cigarettes. But then as the aid situation overall became more and more desperate, they were running off with entire sort of convoys of aid. repeatedly been asking the Israelis, give us alternative routes. Let us use, these safer routes, or at least secure this route for us. They don't. I mean, Israel controls the aid. We might be on the ground in Gaza, but Israel actually controls what we are able to do and how we are able to do it. Just one more example, just to kind of illustrate how absurd everything is. So back in November, early December, there was a huge flour shortage that still exists, but it was significantly more dire back then. So in November, when we were seeing kids being crushed at bakeries, a single 25-kilogram bag of flour in South and Central Gaza cost roughly $900. Here's the crazy part. That same bag of flour in Gaza City cost $1.50. Because flour is being allowed into Gaza City, but that's pretty much all that's being allowed. And obviously you can't feed yourself on only flour. It's not being allowed in South and Central. Now you would think as aid organizations, okay, well, why don't you go pick it up from the north? Why don't you go pick it up from Gaza City and drive it south? We're not permitted to do that. And so we feel we are not able to work. Life-saving aid assistance programs and organizations are themselves on life support.
Yeah, thank you very much for explaining how difficult it is to bring in even most basic things, I think that should not happen at all. Mahmoud, I would like to come back to you, stick to the English. Now we've spoken about civil society, but about humanitarian actors. Maybe we also need to talk more about the role of journalists, cultural actors, artists, intellectuals. They all play an important role in communicating what is happening in Gaza and generating attention, in fighting against dehumanization, as you said it, and also like shaping collective memories. Can you maybe give some examples like how this is done, especially from Palestinian actors? Are there some positive examples, maybe also connected to your book, that you can refer to?
Yes, I mean, my initial interest was, as said before, when I was in the beginning of the year, and you go and you have a shower and you leave the shower more filthy than clean. In Jerusalem, suddenly all this privilege that you have becomes awkward and becomes a burden. How come I can have a clean shower in this morning? And it was really, so my immediate interest was to think of what is the person like me will be in Gaza. What if there's the guy who ran the bookstore in Gaza? What about the guy who have a theater? What about the teachers? So this was my initial go-to, if you like, in the beginning. And these are an important key people in the society, and not just in Gaza. Historically, in Palestine, the cultural leaders, if you like, or the cultural creators are very important, because they're the one who carry the society, and they're the one who carry the cause, if you like, and they carry the Palestinian identity. It's not secret that Palestinian creators, whether in literature or music, or in video, or in art, visual art, or in dance, or in theater, they are the last, if you like, protector of Palestinian identity over the last 75 years of colonization. And when the Palestinian political identity is being challenged, when the Palestinian life is being challenged, it was the responsibility of those actors. So in the book, we interviewed a lot of musicians, a lot of theater actors, teachers, particularly a few teachers who are now doing this training. As we speak, there is teachers who are doing training for other teachers in these tents. Great people, fully motivated, mostly unpaid, but they feel the responsibility. They feel the responsibility, and that's the key message here. Maybe I'll share a fun story, because this book also makes you laugh as much as make you cry. This is the page number is. Well, I need to find the page first. Is it one? Bear with me. I'll find it. This is, sorry. We spoke to Haifa Farjallah, who is one of the only female artists in Gaza, singer, musician. And she spoke about how she's facing racism because she's one of the African community. I mean, this is one of the things that I actually learned throughout the process of making the book, is the cosmopolitan and the diversity of Gaza. I come from Jerusalem, which, you know, we always celebrated that, seeing ourselves as one of the main cities in Palestine. But then you go to Gaza and you find a very, very similar. I mean, I'm saying this shamefully myself, to be honest, but it's like fun. Wow, there's the African community as well in Gaza. Wow, there's the Armenian photographers who have most of the archives of the Armenian of the photos in Gaza between 20s and then the 40s is by 3 Armenian photographers. I always knew there is Christians in Gaza, but then there is Armenians in Gaza. And then you go about the sport, the parkour. Then you go about the female artist who sang on stage, who had racism and who had sexism in her society, but she continued to challenge that and so on. Hussam al-Madhoun is a musician. He's a fantastic writer in his own right, and I hope this is one of the things that comes out of this book is people that have contributed original piece to the book will eventually write their own books. I think the underpinning of such project is also the Palestinians' right to narrate their own story. Edward Said in 1984, I was 2 years old by then, but he said, we lost our permission to narrate our own story. We always need a permission to tell our stories. So part of this is also to help the people of Gaza write their own stories in a way. So I'm going to read this very short piece in page 94. This was in February the 18th, written by Hussam al-Madhoun, who's a theater actor who was in the street, and he saw the following scene. See yourself for a shekel. A boy in the market is holding a tiny piece of mirror, encouraging people to look at their faces for 1 shekel, 25 cents. He's making a living by offering a very rare service. I have not seen my face since I arrived in Rafah many weeks ago. You cannot buy mirrors anymore, and anyway, a mirror is something you forget about in this situation. How you look doesn't really matter. I ask him, do you make money this way? He tells me he does. Lots of people want to see themselves. He says, I make 30 shekels a day or more, but you can see him. The boy points to a man down the street, walking away from us. He looked at his face, but gave the mirror back to me without paying. I'm not stopping him, though. He had a cut from his face all the way down to his chest. A long, horrible cut, not healed well at all. I think it was from shrapnel. He looked at his big, ugly scar, and when he gave me back the mirror, I saw he was crying, so I let him go. I took the boy mirror and looked at my face. It got very skinny. I have no mirror for shaving, so the stubble on my chin is all uneven, some bits longer than others. I am in a mess. I did not cry. I gave the child 2 shekels and continued walking. I mean, just a small comment. Thank you. Just a small comment. You know, mirrors are great metaphorical aspect as well. This wasn't an innocent choice for me today. Mirrors are a very powerful way of looking at the self. When I hold my mirror, and when I held my mirror a year ago in my face with a bit of a tilt, I saw my 3 young girls behind me, and I saw them in 10 years' time asking me a very difficult question. Asking me, when you were living during this genocide and you're watching it in your fancy iPhone, what did you do about it? And this is perhaps the most selfish reason for someone like me sitting in Jerusalem feel the responsibility to at least prepare some sort of bad answers for a very big questions. And I would like to kind of just leave it there for each one to look in his own mirror and to see what we actually are doing, what we have been doing over all this time, watching and just going away with our daily routine, if you like.
Thank you very much. Lieber Abed, ich komme zurück zu dir.
Dear Abed, I'd like to come back to you. After your doctoral thesis, you've come back to Gaza with your family after Hamas assumed power in Gaza and successively has extended this power in times where we've seen repeated wars with Israel that you have experienced living there. Many Palestinians in Gaza do not accept what Hamas is doing, or at least they do not favor the violence that is not only done domestically but towards the outside. The de facto regime has stipulated where money was flowing and who would occupy what kind of vacant position. And here in Germany, we might receive only a shortened version of what Hamas is really like. So how did you perceive that in reality before the 7th of October 2023 took place? Could you give us some insights in how Hamas was perceived? And does it change in any way how people do perceive Hamas? A very difficult question you just raised. Please only provide the response that you're able to do. I will try to go back to the times before this horrible war. And I, of course, am always against all kinds of violence, and what has been done by Gaza, the 7th of October, of course, has to be denounced. But what we have experienced in our state since the foundation 1967 is not a very easy situation. So this, what happened on the 7th of October has not happened before any anticipation, and has not been created in a vacuum. And what usually happens, experts are found, we analyze everything, we try to find the root cause and to assess the situation. And this is something that I miss, the question of why this happened.
Ja, vielen Dank. Deshalb wurde als eine unerwünschte
Sorry, we did
Person
not
in
get
einem
that.
einzigen
So
demokratischen
this
Land im
is
Nahen Osten
why he is considered a non-desired person in this country. He cannot enter this country because he expressed his opinion. This would be the first part. Until October 2023, I've never thought I would want to leave Gaza, despite all these difficulties we encountered. Of course, we did not have everything. Until the day of war, Gaza was described as the biggest prison under the earth, the biggest open-air prison. And now this has turned into the biggest graveyard in the world. So wherever you look, you will always find bodies that have been buried. And I don't know where my brother has been buried, who lost his life on the 5th of December. I do not know that. His 2 children have been there, and his wife has been injured as well. He could have turned 42 years old today, but he did not have that opportunity because he was in the wrong place and the wrong point of time. This is just the one destiny of one of my brothers. And apart from that, of course, I try to maintain contact to my family in Gaza, but this does not always happen or cannot always achieve that because of the problems. I was talking about the access to electricity. Coming back to this story, before the 7th of October, we had a routine, a daily routine, more or less. The kids would go to school, came back, I would go to work, my wife would go to work, and we would come back. So this was more or less a normal daily routine, and we got used to, this normal daily routine. Last year, in summer, from the 5th of July to the 5th of September, I was hearing here in Germany as a fellow professor, and only 4 weeks passed until the 7th of October broke out. And back to your question. I do think that Hamas did not really have the means, the necessary financial resources, and the de facto regime placed many people in these positions, and they did have to receive some income, and they only barely received 40 to 50% of their monthly income. So it did work out, but it wasn't really that easy. So I have not the right knowledge right now. I don't know. If we had elections today, how many of those Palestinians now would vote for Hamas? I left Gaza the 23rd of April, and this is my personal opinion. I would assume, maybe I'm totally wrong, but this is just my personal opinion. I think that Hamas would probably not receive more than 1/3 of the votes, but this is just an assumption, so I do not have any clear idea to state that. As an engineer, I'm used to talking about facts and figures and know what I'm talking about, but with these kind of questions, I lack the close contact. And since I left Gaza in April 2024, some time has gone by. I told you that we were living in the south, and we were able to leave Gaza 2 weeks before the state of Israel occupied Rafah in the south of Gaza. And we did have the possibility to move goods forth and back until the 7th of May. Goods could be transported to the south, and in the north we saw more and more problems. And referring to the prices Awa just mentioned, there are huge differences when you consider the same product sold in the north or in the south of Gaza. There is huge differences. And when I'm talking about the north, I talk about Gaza City, because the northern Gaza Strip, nothing is allowed in there. And talk about Jabalia, Belambour, and we hardly have anything entering. No flour, no food, nothing whatsoever. So we have some goods entering, but the prices are hardly imaginable. Half a liter of detergent could be worth 10 euros, shampoo maybe 15 euros, or nappies for, or let's say, for the elderly. My wife did have to look 3 hours in the pharmacy for hours to find it, and they were worth 70 euros. And the same applies to those examples I just mentioned, like the cigarettes. Of course, we have a war situation. Nothing is normal during war times, and I wish you and all those people in the world that you have to live under these circumstances, because war, of course, is something that is a document of poverty for this world. This is totally uncivilian, and we always ask for the never again, but it is happening once and again. And the world community is watching on, they're observing, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So they are basically assistants to what is happening, because it can hardly be described with words what is happening in Gaza. Thank you for your very personal experience. Avi wanted to.
Statistics, actually, because so interestingly, an organization called the Arab Barometer was actually running a survey right before October 7th. And in that survey, they found that should there have been elections, the Hamas candidate would have hypothetically won roughly, I want to say I'm going from memory here, but maybe 23% of the vote. So doing slightly better than Benjamin Netanyahu. But really, this idea that, you know, Gazans are Hamas and Palestinians are Hamas is absolutely absurd.
Thank you for this important addition. Dorte, jetzt genau, geht es auf Deutsch weiter und ich komme zu dir.
Okay, I'll continue in German. And at the beginning, you already said that there may be a ceasefire and a hostage swap. And well, when talking about the solution of the bigger conflict between Israel and Palestinians, and in Germany, the question really is, in a post-war Gaza or in Palestine, who could assume political responsibility? I would like to ask you, what governance scenarios could you imagine for Gaza and the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority? What will their role be? Well, this is a very complex and at the same time very important question, Bauke. So I will try to give you an outline and possible scenarios. First of all, it is in the past few days and weeks that we saw more than ever that the PA is strongly criticizing Hamas for their behavior, and thus they try to identify as an institution that the world can cooperate with. And they also try to demonstrate that they have a strong interest in supporting this Palestinian Authority from the perspective of the Palestinians. They have a critical view, that's my impression, because they say, how can the international community cooperate with the Palestinian Authority so that it can establish itself in Gaza without asking us? That means free, fair, democratic elections. Nonetheless, and I'm saying this also in my capacity as a political scientist, that I see a certain chance that if the PA in the Gaza Strip, if they want to have a bigger role to play in the future, when analyzing the future of the Gaza Strip and the right to self-determination of the Palestinians there, also with a view to a two-state solution, it is elementary that there will be a unification of the Palestinian territories. That means the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This is necessary for them to play a bigger role, but well, on the aspect of human rights, we of course need to ensure participation of the Palestinians. And tonight, as you mentioned it initially, Bauke, we saw the news. So apparently, a ceasefire can be obtained so that the first phase can start. That's certainly a positive signal. And many of us have certainly been waiting for it. Nonetheless, I think we should not equate this with the beginning of a political solution. It seems more important than ever, but at the same time, it seems out of reach, really, for the time being. This leads me to the question of what Germany can and should do when thinking about the future, a future for the Gaza Strip. We regularly hear that Germany is saying that it is providing strong financial support for humanitarian aid. But we have realized tonight that it is substantial, absolutely substantial and important. But at the same time, human rights activities must not cease. German and European policy should really see this, and they should really follow the rhythm of the other activities. And in this connection, I think it is very important also with the historical responsibility of Germany in the background. One should recognize the ruling of the International Court of Criminal Justice. The Arab states saw it very critically when this the Court of Criminal Justice started its activities, and it has been criticized that said that it is no genocide, and couldn't the International Criminal Court, shouldn't they focus on the essential questions first? And this is important. And at the same time, the Böll Foundation, political foundations, and also other organizations that provide relief and mediation. It is important for all organizations, also in Israel, that more support will emanate from German institutions and ministries, and for that reason, it is not just confusing, but against the backdrop of a feminist German foreign policy, human rights organizations are no longer receiving support. So the organizations should stay in a close dialogue with German and European political institutions.
Ja, danke für dieses Plädoyer für eine Fortführung der Finanzierung, insbesondere auch von Menschenrechtsorganisationen vor Ort. We will do a quick third round on the panel, and then we come to you and your question from the audience. So I would ask all the panelists to be sharp and precise with their questions. Mahmoud, maybe we start with you this round. Speaking about the future of a Palestinian state, as you mentioned, implies that there is at some point unity between the different territories, meaning the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. On the political level, this unity is not yet in sight, at least right now. But on the human level, I feel there is a lot of bond solidarity between Palestinians living in the West Bank or East Jerusalem and in Gaza, especially after October 7th, 2023. Can you maybe tell us how Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem perceive the war in Gaza and how they express their solidarity as humans, individuals, so not saying as political collective, but more like on a personal level with their brothers and sisters in Gaza? How do you see this living in East Jerusalem?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this comes 75 years after the Palestinian Nakba. The Palestinians have learned through different hardware ways on how to keep their wholenessness, if you like, and all their Palestinianness. We get in our ups and downs, but let's not get into the business of blaming the victims. The Palestinians are fragmented and divided by design. It's not because they like to be divided. And let's also not use the advantage of having multi-political parties and multi-representation among Palestinians as a problem. It's actually a healthy society that the Palestinians have. You might like one party than the others, but it's actually part of our cosmopolitan political culture that we do actually have different political parties, and we wanted to keep these political parties, and we wanted to keep that diversity because that is a healthy political context. The fragmentation is by design, and unfortunately, when we used to speak about West Bank and diaspora, we started to speak about Jerusalem, West Bank, and Palestinians inside Israel. Then we start to speak about Palestinians in Area A and Area B and Area C separate from Gaza. And now we start to speak about Gaza North and Center and South. All of this is man-made divisions that we hope that the world actually give us assistance and help us politically, not just humanitarianly. The Palestinians did not find them in this situation because there was a very bad rainy day or a national disaster that we find ourselves fragmented. This is a reality that man-made by our colonizer, our occupier, if you like, and is getting worse. And that needs to be addressed. And I think places like Germany is one place to start. after this, the future, of course there need to be a political revitalizing of the Palestinian national movement. Let's be clear about this, whether through the BLO or through other avenues, but the Palestinians need to come together in a clear political program. But we just experienced plausible, according to International Criminal Court, plausible genocide. The people who perpetrate this genocide need to go through dual process. Let's not forget this. Now we have a big element on this conflict. We wanted to see and we wanted to persecute the people who have implemented a genocide. We can't go on Monday just like the day before. The Palestinians are equally human beings, and they are not the sons of a lesser good mom as well. We need to ask, and we need to put on the agenda the dual legal process for all those people who've been involved in this genocide, and may I add, all the people who were complicit or supportive of that genocide as well. And this is a very important point, and it will be one of the Palestinian political demand in the future.
Thank you for sharing it. And indeed, as Dorte mentioned, therefore it's so important that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, can do its work and is actually right now assessing whether or not this is, in legal terms, a genocide or not. And of course, then it's important that all these legal procedures are followed and that international humanitarian law is abided by and by all the parties and everyone. And this, as you said, same standards. I'm
not gonna push back too much, but if it is not genocide, there is a lot of humanitarian international law has been broken. Humanitarian law and crimes against humanity has been committed, and that also part of the international legal work that we as people of the world have built after the Second World War, and those things need to be addressed. Again, we are not the sons of a lesser mom as well. We demand our equal rights exactly like other human beings on this planet.
Well understood. So Ava, maybe a last question for you on the panel. As we speak, maybe the details of this ceasefire agreement and the liberation of the hostages is maybe still being talked about. But beside this, so what would be for you the elements that are most important to really help people on the ground to make sure that aid can better come into Gaza? Because, I mean, of course, it's good if the fighting stops, but even more important is that the situation improves for people on the ground, the situation that you reported about. So what would be things where you say this is really crucial right now if there is a potential agreement, a ceasefire that hopefully holds?
Well, this is really crucial right now, even without a potential ceasefire agreement. There's 120,000 tons of food aid waiting at 3 crossing points to go into Gaza. That's enough to feed everybody for 3 months. That needs to go into Gaza. There are thousands, I don't remember the last number off the top of my head, but it's over 10,000 people who are waiting for critical medical evacuation. People are dying, not just of bombs and bullets, but of entirely preventable disease. The system needs to allow not just for a flow of goods in, but for those who choose to leave, whether it's for medical or other reasons, to be permitted to leave, and then to also have the right to live in safety and in dignity outside of Gaza. Sorry, and I need to bring this up too, because it's another, I think, very important point. You know, in my time at CNN, I covered a bunch of wars, right? Iraq, Syria. You flee Iraq, you flee Syria, you flee Afghanistan, you're automatically considered a refugee and you have certain rights. There's an office that you can go to register, to say, you know, I'm a refugee, I fled this war. They'll give you housing for X amount of time. They'll give you, you know, that card that you can go and use and buy food with, so that you can at least set yourself up for a few months, because you have just fled your home and everything that you know and have, except if you are leaving from Gaza. So prior to Gaza closing off completely, prior to Rafah closing, people who fled the war in Gaza and landed in other countries, mostly in Egypt, did not have these same rights as any other nationality, as far as I'm aware, has when they land in a country and say, I'm a refugee. That has to change as well. I mean, so when we talk about sort of the injustices that are happening and calling them injustices is such a small word. It's multi-tiered and it's at every single level. And I am sorry. I am sorry that this is the world we live in. And we all, and I genuinely believe this, have a moral burden of responsibility to be better and to do better. And anyone who thinks that they're doing enough is deluding themselves.
Dorte, noch einmal zu dir. Bald wird
Daughter, a question for you soon, and that will be the inauguration of Donald Trump to the White House, and this inauguration may have contributed to the fact that Netanyahu consented to this deal. So what needs to be expected with a view to Palestine, Gaza, and maybe what can Germany do or not say? Yes, Donald Trump really pushed for this with his own mediator in Qatar on the spot, in addition to the representatives of the Biden administration. And that's correct. Nonetheless, I do not expect too many good news when it comes to the annexation of the West Bank, which is clearly on the table. And I do not feel that the ceasefire negotiations will be a positive signal in the direction of the West Bank. And I'm reiterating what I said before. Germany, in conjunction with other states, should really counteract these initiatives. And we have seen for a long time that the European position is really to wait for what is happening in the US, and they want to wait for the US opinion. And Arvid, the last question on the panel. Tonight we have heard that go to the limits of what I can imagine as a person living in Germany. And if you have witnessed these things in Gaza, it must be severely traumatizing. And these traumas will certainly accompany people, and it will certainly have ramifications on the Palestinian society. Do you have an idea of what we can expect? Do you have any observations from your friends, your family, apart from the physical wounds? How about the psychological burden after going through this experience? What does it do with a Palestinian society? And you went back to Gaza, you have seen many wars, and then you reached a point where you said, I will leave Gaza, although I have gone through such a lot. Well, I did not choose to leave Gaza. I had to leave Gaza. I have to correct you here, and I had to pay $30,000 to leave Gaza. I did not have the funds, but it was collected in Germany and in other countries so that I could leave Gaza. I don't have a German passport. I don't work for an international organization or not a German organization. And for that reason, we could not leave Gaza, but we were expelled, in inverted commas. And even in 2023, this happened. And I don't want to discuss politics at this point, but let me come back to your question. Well, and we live under very harsh conditions, and we are very vulnerable and somewhat aggressive. The wars 2009, 2014, 2021, and in my eyes, it was not a war as the one from 2023 that is ongoing. And I used to use the term of war because, well, it was military clashes, and then, you know, there was military activity. But, we lived under the siege, and it was clashes between the occupiers and the occupied. But in 2023, it was the real first war in Gaza, because food supply, tap water, potable water, and natural gas and electricity cuts since the 8th or 9th of October. No electricity is coming to Gaza from Israel, and the goods that we receive do not even cover 5% of the daily needs. Not even 5%. There are supplies, but they don't even cover 5% of the daily needs. And this leads also to internal tensions. But I want to talk about my family. I have a 2-year-old daughter. We were in Berlin. My oldest daughter, she'll turn 18. She was born here. And when the fireworks started, the 2-year-old and the 17-year-old, they started to scream. And the eldest daughter, she's the second eldest, I was able to comfort her, and she understood it, and she was not able to look into the lights. She was able to cope, but the 2-year-old, I was not able to console her. It's a trauma that is subconscious. The war started when she was not even 1 year old, and this is really hard. And the other 2 children are partly traumatized. And it is not a secret, that the entire people is traumatized. We're all traumatized. And often we did not learn, and we did not have to expect this level, and the fear not to wake up next morning, and no protection, the inability to offer protection for the family, and simply being, paralyzed. We are not able to do anything, and this further contributes to a situation where we are the traumatization continues, and this really is a proof of incapacity from the part of the international community. In Oslo, negotiations started, and this was in 1994, the Oslo peace process, and then it should have been concluded. We should have lived in peace, but between 1994 and 2023, nothing was created, nothing at all. It was only the number of settlers between 1993 and 1994. There used to be 30 to 40,000. You can go back in the archives and find all the figures. But we have almost 1 million of settlers in 2023. And when talking about a two-state solution, how should this become a reality, also with a view to the future of Palestine and the state of Israel? How do you want to create a two-state solution? What should it look like? I have no idea. And, it is all intertwined, and this lack of perspective, and, like the international community may create a situation where a peaceful coexistence will be possible, but unfortunately the pressure was not exerted, no external pressure. So I do not believe that we will achieve a peaceful coexistence. So I think our trauma will continue to exist. Or, excuse the term of crazy, but, if you can achieve something with other means, and maybe some people hoped that it would not be achieved. Trump, we saw his 4-year term, and those drowning, they are now clinging to a straw, and you cling to every straw if you're drowning. But unfortunately, I'm limited in time. I would have liked to say a lot more, but maybe there will be questions also from the audience, and maybe I can answer them. in the same context. Thank you.
Ja, nun sind genau Sie dran mit Fragen an unsere.
Now, over to you with your questions. To the panelists, I'd like to ask you if you could briefly present yourselves and ask precise and brief questions so we can cover more of these questions. My colleague Ina will collect your questions and then we will give them back to the panel. Please ask your questions in German or English. We have two hands raised here in the back and for the ones in the middle. Good evening. Yad Musa, my name, and I'm living in Berlin since 1980, and we try to be engaged for the rights of the Palestinians. And I have two questions, if you allow me. The first question would be directed to the lady from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. If I understood you right, you said that reports on crimes and violence in Gaza that you learn about this via a signal group. So you do receive data on what is happening via the signal, and you do register them as true facts. Do I get that right? So maybe you can delve into that. And the second question would be, Dr. Shukri just said two-state solution is not really, or does not seem to be possible, because annexation of the West Bank is a permanent problem since 1967, and Israel tried to bring about the annexation of the whole West Bank. And on top of that, Israel in June 2024, let's please come to the question. This is the question that in the Parliament and the Knesset in July 2024 we're talking about has turned down to build a Palestinian state. They absolutely rejected that possibility. So my question to all of you. For me, this would be a possibility. How about you to find a one-state solution, a state for all, under fair and just conditions for all those people living from the river to the sea, and the historical Palestine, for Israelis and Palestinians alike to live under the same rights? Would this be something that you could envisage? I think this would be a good idea. Yeah. Question reached as well. Next question. Ismail is my name. I'm a Palestinian myself. And I have worked for the GIZ in Jordan for several times and was dealing with water issues. Two short comments. In the beginning of the facilitation, we were talking about the war between Hamas and Israel, and it would be very cautious because this is not a war that is developing between Hamas and Israel. This is really an attack on the Palestinian people as a whole. We were talking about all this suspicion of genocide that has been confirmed and is looked into further, and the decision of the International Criminal Court to issue a detention order against Netanyahu and his former minister because they have really committed these crimes does underscore that this is really what happened. So why do I say that? That war between Hamas and Israel should be something that should be treated with a lot of caution, because unfortunately the public press does depict this as such, and it's merely wrong. So we have to be very cautious to lay it out like that in an event like this. And please let me finish. It is about an occupation, and Dr. Shogri said so, that the situation we found on the 7th of October did not happen out of a vacuum, but we have to understand the context in order to know why this happened. Just a very short comment to finish off with. This is very important. It has not been mentioned. Now, the funds that have been curtailed in Palestine, but in Israel itself, because we do have human rights organizations that try to support the occupied areas. They have been curtailed by the German government when it comes to the funding, and this happened after the 6th of November of the anti-Semitism resolution. So this led to the fact that those means of funding have been cut off of these organizations. And this resolution really is an endeavor to silence people, to do away with the freedom of speech. It is not about anti-Semitism. I think it does promote anti-Semitism globally, and it does affect Jewish human rights organizations as well. So maybe for those who do not know what we are talking about, so there was a resolution that said that never again reinforcing or empowering Jewish life, and this has been perceived quite critically by human rights organizations and NGOs. Did we have anybody else? Here, this is the lady in the middle, and I see you. Put you on my list. Shirin Varzad is my name, and I do study international relations in Dresden, and currently I am doing an internship in human rights in the Federal Ministry for Development. And I have a question for Ms. Damon. You said that in Gaza you have gangs that interfere when it comes to AIDS deliveries, and I would like to know, as a person who has been there, what kind of gangs you're talking about, if you have any names, if you can be a bit more precise, because it's very hard for me to imagine how they have got an ownership of these aids. So maybe we come to a short round of answers and continue with the next round. Daughter, would you like to start out with a question on reports on sexualized violence? I think you're referring to communication. It is about how we work. So in our office, we have a lot of paper and documentation work in form of paper, but due to the destroyed infrastructure, this is no longer possible. Therefore, we do have to rely on services, messaging services like Signal. So we do not receive those reports in written format, but they send us voice messages that we then later on transcribe. So that does not mean that we are part of bigger WhatsApp or Signal groups. This has been just one example, sexualized violence. But of course, we do cover other issues that have to do with the daily life and the fight for survival of our target groups and the communities we work with in the Gaza Strip. So this is just a creative means in order to be able to keep on working with our partners.
Dann hatten wir die Frage zu der
Ein-Staaten-Lösung,
on
the one-state solution, if this is something that you could envisage.
Desirable. Anyone wants to answer? Mahmoud, you seem to.
The answer is yes. I mean, you will have to. This is not going to sound right for many people, but you will have to visit your doctors often if you still think two-state solution is still possible. But of course, we have an international historical commitment to two-state. You have the main so-called representative of the two groups are actually adopting the two-state. So that's why the two-state is in this life support. You know, I come from Jerusalem. The Holy Land have seen resurrection a few times. So there are people who believe the two-state is dead, but it's going to resurrect because it's the Holy Land. The resurrection happens in the Holy Land. But as someone who spent 3/4 of his life in the two-state process, I'm not going to be willing to invest any minute of my intellectual abilities to engage in the two-state, to be quite honest with you. If you perform it or you do it as EU or as Germany or the international community or Mr. Trump or Mr. X or whoever does it tomorrow, I'm not going to object. Let's be very clear. I will sign it. I'm very happy with it. I wanted my daughters to live a much better life than I lived. So I'm not going to veto a two-state. But if you're asking me, is it possible? I would say it is not. And we have to move on to a discussion on one state. I had talked to one of the legal players in Gaza, and I'm going to read his short paragraph.
If it's short, yes.
It is very short, and this is page 262. This is Issam Yunus, who's the head of Al-Mizan organization, the human rights organization in he is known here, excellent. He said, I wholeheartedly, this is a long interview, at the end of it, he said, I wholeheartedly believe that justice will prevail. Victims, sadly, sometimes don't see justice in their lifetime. But collectively, we, the people, will see justice. However, justice cannot undo what has been done. The pain will stay. And we should be firm in resisting populist narrative around justice as revenge. Justice is the most honorable of human values. Our national vision should be based on a concept of justice as a high moral principle. We, the Palestinians, need to unpack these terms and establish what justice means to us. Whatever the practical details of a future state might be, it must be found on principle of fairness and equality for all under the law. We need to take back the initiative. For someone in April, in the height of the genocide, being able to nuance the national movement, the Palestinian struggle along the lines of justice and fairness, regardless of the social construct with the state, I think it's very commendable. And it is telling you that the Palestinian humanity is still alive.
And we had one more question for you, Ava, where it's about this criminal gangs that are looting the humanitarian trucks, and the lady was asking, like, who are these gangs, or where are they from?
So kind of along the sort of, especially along the border area, and obviously you're from Gaza, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something of a sort of the tribes, right? They say, like, El-Badu, the Bedouins control this area. So after October 7th, when Israel began bombing Gaza like crazy, effectively rule of law was completely eradicated. There are no policemen, there is no rule of law whatsoever. And once that was eradicated, especially as the hunger and the desperation became significantly worse and worse, we began to see the emergence of more and more of these criminal gangs and these looters, and a lot of them are believed to be part of these more sort of tribal communities. Ironically, the very same sort of interfamily feudal systems and tribal communities that actually Hamas managed to rein in back in 2005, that some would argue was part of why they were so popular, back then. And so once rule of law was eradicated, anyone with nefarious intent can very easily rise up to the top and do whatever it is that they want. And I call it deliberately orchestrated anarchy, because anyone knows that when you go in militarily to an area and you remove its systems of rule of law, whether you like them or not, this sort of violence and criminality is going to start to prevail. And when you continue to allow it to prevail, because it is happening in areas that you ostensibly declare to be your red zones, that you ostensibly say that no human being is allowed to be in unless they've gone through 17,000 layers of coordination with you, the burden of responsibility to secure a humanitarian aid convoy or provided an alternative route does also lie with you, i.e. with Israel.
All right, we go for a quick second round. We have the gentleman in the middle. Then I see here a question, there a question.
Ich will Ihnen die Laune nicht verderben, aber
I don't want to spoil the mood, but where do you take your hope from? Let's look at the situation. Let's look at the two sides. Who is governing in Israel? We have Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Those are declared racists. And in Haaretz, you could read it openly. They are openly declared racists. They are not talking about animals when they talk about Hamas, but about the whole Palestinian population. Let's look at Hamas. They are an offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they will not become extinct until the Muslim Brotherhood becomes extinct, and they will always prevail. And who knows that is convinced of that? So Hamas is not an organization that is working towards a solution, but they want an Islamic State to be founded. Do you have a precise question, or where do you get your hope? So I do really have to ask that question. Thank you. Maybe here in the first row, Bente, you raised your hand. Bente Scheller is my name, and I'm the department head of North Africa and Middle East. Thank you so much for your comments and your shared views and anecdotes that do illustrate the suffering very well. I do have a question, because the ceasefire deal does inspire some hopes, but the problems when it comes to the humanitarian situation and aid deliveries, and when it comes to education, it goes a lot further. So there is a possibility that Israel does not permit the deliveries of the UNRWA, and this is supposed to end within 2 weeks. And UNRWA is quite active, so if this should break away, then another field of conflict would open up. So how do you perceive that? Because those protected spaces have been connected to that, because we had the UNRWA schools as a space that was identified as not being an aim, but they were still attacked. Do you think that the problem will be exacerbated when the UNRWA does not acknowledge the UNRWA as a legitimate player?
Geht's zurück zum Panel.
Okay, danke. Ich habe eigentlich einen Kommentar.
I do have a comment rather than a question.
Dorite, es tut mir leid.
Dorte, I'm sorry, the Palestinians do not need humanitarian aid from Germany, first and foremost from Germany. Germany does have a very bad image in the Gaza Strip. It is rather an enemy, and not only politically speaking. They have helped not only by funding, but as well militarily. In Germany, surely know that children and women are killed, that people starve. And on top of that, Germany still supports and protects Israel in the International Criminal Court. So how can we even imagine that? If we will see such a process, then we need a political process to accompany the ceasefire, because 30 years of humanitarian aid and that Palestinians still have the status is not acceptable. The Palestinians need and will need to work with justice. This is the term that we need. The Israeli government and all people have to bear the responsibility for what has happened. So we have two questions in the back, and we make a final round on the panel, and we might be threatening to go a little bit over time.
Thank you. My name is Gunnar. I happen to be German. I want to know something about the quarrel between Fatah and Hamas. Does anyone see a perspective that there might be a debate, a kind of dialogue that they find a common aim for the future, for the present, and a common aim to get justice and sooner or later, hopefully, a kind of reconciliation. I think justice is really extremely important. And there's one voice of Israel that makes me hope. I read a message of Tom Segev, and he wrote about the fate of Palestinians, and he made me hope because he has a perspective of this question of justice and reconciliation, and that makes me a bit hope.
Thank you. Last question from the lady over there. Yeah. Genau, ich hatte, ja.
Hallo, ich bin Nicola Abbas.
Nicola Abbas is my name, and I do share a long biography with the Middle East. I've studied Middle East, and now I'm working as an interpreter, mainly for Arabic. And my question goes as follows. You mentioned on the sidelines that people should do something. So what is it that we as civilians can do here in Germany? Because I have to admit that for decades I have dealt with this conflict professionally, and then from 2012 on I tried to retract because it was so depressing for me, and I did have to deal with many other Arab countries. And since October 2023, I wanted to do something because this conflict broke over me once again, and I was told I was an anti-Semite, and people told me that I was proclaiming anti-Islamistic propaganda. And this is very cumbersome for me. I do not really have the energy to do that, although it might sound a bit ridiculed when we talk about the suffering of Gaza. But of course, it does not help any if someone like me gets totally burned. I've made a donation, and I am in the pro-Palestina group in Amnesty International. But for me, it's absolutely frustrating. I see no way out. So my question goes to you, what can I do? Of course, it would be my need to provide humanitarian aid on site, but it's very difficult to get access.
Thank you. Let me summarize. First of all, where do we take hope from? With a view to the antagonist positions, particularly between the Israeli right and Hamas. Second, what is going to happen if the UNRWA will be forbidden or banned by Knesset? Then the relationship between Fatah and Hamas, and then what can we do in order to help on the spot? So I would suggest that we go from here to there. And could you briefly answer to the questions that you would like to answer? Concerning the question of hope, what concerns me personally, as long as there are progressive voices in Israel and Palestine that demonstrate interest in the change of their situation and that cling to that, especially in the past few years, together with Palestinian partners and the cooperation with Gaza. Together with my team in Ramallah, you know, I'm hopeful as long as the civil society in Palestine has not given up hope, obviously, and despite the most adverse conditions, it is in a position to fight for its right to self-determination and its rights. And as long as this is the case, there should be international supporters for that. And then a very small point, Osama. So hopefully I haven't been misunderstood. I said humanitarian help is important, and nonetheless I want to know about the position of human rights work. So I was not suggesting that we... Okay, a ceasefire seems to be a positive signal, but it is precisely a political situation that is necessary for ending the war in Gaza and for the sake of Palestinian self-determination as such.
Ava, are you ready for last?
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm just stuck to my phone because Qatar has just announced that there is a ceasefire that has been agreed upon and that it's supposed to be starting on Sunday. So, yeah.
We had the question on UNRWA.
Yes, UNRWA. So UNRWA's role is extraordinarily vital. I mean, no other organization can do what UNRWA does, and this idea that it can somehow just be replaced, it's not just about, you know, the delivery of aid. It's about all of the other services that UNRWA provides. It's about the schools that it runs. It's about the clinics that it allows people to have access to. It's about how, you know, most Palestinians who you meet at some point in time, if not for the vast majority of their childhood, affiliate the education they've gotten, the other forms of support that they've gotten, the access to medical care that they've gotten to something that is related to UNRWA. This is a very deeply, obviously, political decision because Israel and UNRWA have been at each other's throats for ages. And Israel has long, well before October 7th, wanted to eradicate UNRWA from the entire system. You know, we keep saying that we can't backstop it. The challenge, though, is that, and this kind of goes to underscore the occupation, because UNRWA can't function inside Palestine without Israeli approval. And so let's hypothetically say that the ceasefire, you know, doesn't hold or doesn't materialize. What happens to all of the areas that UNRWA has had deconflicted inside Gaza? Do they automatically, you know, do they lose that status? Do they automatically become targets? Not that, you know, it really matters because schools have regularly been targeted over and over again, but, you know, it's just another layer of like added suffering and added struggle for everybody.
Thank you for the quick analysis. Challenging for the translators, I guess. It's fine. Lieber Abed, willst du noch dir eine Frage rauspicken?
Auf die vielen, also
would you like to pick a question? Well, concerning UNRWA, it will continue its activities in the occupied territories, as I believe, and this will certainly happen in Gaza. Whether in the West Bank, I don't know. In the camp schools, like a year ago, they were set on fire and everything. So East Jerusalem, I doubt it, but Gaza, I think so. And West Bank, it depends on the political situation in Israel. And if the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, should ban it, I don't know how UNRWA will deal with that. But UNRWA, you know, according to a UN resolution, it was founded. And this is really based on a UN resolution. And if you accept one resolution, you have to accept the other as well. So you can't say you accept an UN resolution on one side and not on the other. So it's a question of either or. Concerning aid, well, individual financial aid, well, it's also a question for the MPs. There are German parliamentary elections upcoming, so you really have to think twice who to vote for. What is the Middle East policy of the one or the other party? And should I make my vote dependent on that question? Well, it depends on the individual, but let me say it honestly. I'm glad that I'm not allowed to vote because I really have no idea. I would have voted for the Greens, but at the moment, I'm not so sure. This is my personal opinion. Let me emphasize that. And we can also talk to the federal foreign minister, and then I will be happy to give her my opinion. Thank you.
I will attempt to very briefly answer the two questions. This is the advantage of coming from a city like Jerusalem. You don't see history in 20 years, on 50 years. Our lens is usually bigger. So my hope, first of all, let's quote another great Palestinian writer, Mahmoud Darwish, the great poet. He said in one of his poems, we cultivate hope. Hopelessness, I came to learn, if I may be provocative, hopelessness is a European privilege. you can be hopelessness. You can be hopeless. I cannot. I cannot be hopeful. I have 3 daughters at home. What is hopelessness mean to me? I have to tell them that you have to live in conflict and in occupation, and you have to live as less equal human being for the rest of your life just because you are born to a Palestinian mom and dad. We cultivate hope. That's what Mahmoud Darwish said. We plant it, we water it, we wait for the sun, and then we cultivate it, and then we do it again, right? You have to make your own hope. Gramsci have spoke about the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. You know, it's true. If you apply your brain, there's nothing good or hopeful. But you have to work from your heart sometimes. And it's good to believe in your heart. Oppression and occupation is unsustainable. Ethnic purity is unsustainable. All of these things that we see around the Israel-Palestine conflict today is unsustainable. It could live for another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years. But it cannot go forever. That's what we learn from history. And I invite you to be a little bit more optimistic and open your lens up to see history in more than 20, 30, or 50, or 70 years. Of course, I wish the oppression and the occupation end tomorrow, because this is also life and people's life we're dealing with. But we have to also keep cultivating our hope. The question of what we do, Reem Abdi Jaber, this is one-line quote. Reem Abdi Jaber is a Palestinian young girl. She was asked a question by a journalist, because, you know, again, journalists ask very great questions. So he said, she's page 208. He asking her, the journalist from France 24 TV, he asked, how are you? So she answered, we in Gaza are fine. But how are you? What about your conscience, values, everything? We are concerned. That's what we do. We keep our values. We keep our values, we keep our morals, we keep our humanity. And that is the best answer to everything else. Practically, I can't tell you what to do. You know what you to do. Everyone needs to look at the mirror, as I said earlier, and see according to his spectrum where he works, what he do, where his shopping is, what is his beliefs, and then you need to find your answers for yourself. But we need to do something about it, because we will be asked one day what you have done about it, and we need to start to prepare our questions. Sorry, our answers.
Yeah. Wir sind am Ende des heutigen Abends angekommen.
Well, this concludes this event. Sorry we took a bit longer, but there are many questions to be answered. So thank you very much for joining us, for your patience, for your discussion. Thanks to the sound engineers, the translators, and 1,000 thanks for you for following our invitation, your expertise. Abid, all the best for you and your family. Thank you for sharing your personal story. And I do hope that there will be many more occasions for us to sit together. Thank you, daughter, for joining us. And great to have you here. And you're an expert in our network. Mahmoud, thank you.
For all your wisdom, but also for sharing the stories from your book that hopefully many people will read, because I think it's really important to hear the voice from people from Gaza directly.
I have few copies, and it is fundraising for medical aid. If you want
Okay, then later on. And last but not least, thank you, Ava, for coming and for sharing your stories from Gaza, and especially for the work that you're doing with Inara in Gaza, but also in other war zones. That is really so important. Thank you very much. All of you take care and have a nice evening. Thank you.